The ship stopped screaming first. Not the crew, the ship. Its engines fell silent one by one, like a heartbeat slowing toward death. Then the lights. Then the gravity. Then the alarms. The alarms that had never once been quiet in 11 days of running stopped too. Mid-wail, as if something had put a hand over their mouth. And in the sudden, absolute silence, High Minister Taleth heard it. They all heard it. A sound that could not exist in space. A sound that had no right to reach their ears at all. Coming not from the walls, not from the vents, not from any machine on any of the 40 warships huddled in the black. Breathing. Slow, deep, patient. The breath of something enormous that had finished a very long wait. Every screen on every ship went dark at once. Not a failure, deliberate, as though something had reached through the void and gently closed their eyes. And when the screens came back, they did not show empty space. They showed a figure, alone, standing in the middle of nothing, facing 40 warships and 4 million souls, as if he had been expecting them for a very long time. And when he spoke, it was not in a language any of them knew. It was in theirs, perfectly, as though he had learned it centuries ago and had been waiting ever since for the chance to use it. "Don't turn your engines back on," he said, almost kindly. "You finally found somewhere quiet. And I have been so patient." Taleth's knuckles went white on the armrest. 4 million souls, 40 warships, the last of the Arasi Empire, fled into the only place the Ulgathi swarm was afraid to follow. She had believed this dead zone was their salvation. She was about to learn she had led them into the one place in the galaxy they should have feared more. Because the figure on the screens was not a monster, not a god, not the swarm that had eaten their homeworld. He was smaller than any of them, older than any of them. Alone, in a dead zone the entire galaxy feared, as though it were not a graveyard, but a room. His room. And Taleth finally understood. She had not led her people to safety. She had delivered them to the one thing in the galaxy that made even the swarm turn and run. A human. The Ulgathi swarm had not always been the terror of the galaxy. Once they had been a people, a civilization, tall, patient, luminous, builders of cities that hung between the stars like jewelry. That was before the hunger came to them, before their collective mind, that great shared consciousness that had lifted them to the stars, had been corrupted by something vast and ancient that they woke from the deep places of a dead world. What crawled out of that world was not the Ulgathi. It was what the Ulgathi became, when their unity curdled into appetite. They did not conquer worlds, they consumed them. Not the people, not the resources, the consciousness. The Ulgathi did not eat flesh or metal or fuel. They ate minds. They drank the awareness of entire civilizations, drained them of every thought they had ever had, every dream, every fear, and left behind walking husks that smiled and did not know why. The Arasi had watched it happen to their neighbors first, then their allies, then their outer colonies, then their homeworld. Taleth remembered the last transmission from the capital, her mother's voice, calm to the very end, reciting a children's lullaby, while the world below her turned to silent, empty things that still moved. The transmission had not cut out, it had simply stopped being a transmission, replaced by a soft, wet harmony of countless minds being fed upon, a sound Taleth would carry to her grave. She had ordered the evacuation with less than an hour to spare. 40 warships, 4 million souls. Every ship that could carry life, every hull that could hold a heartbeat, pressed into service. They had not even had time to mourn. The armada had run, and it had run, and it had run. And now The running was over. "We cannot stop here," Kale said. Taleth turned. War Priest Kale stood at the far end of the bridge, still wearing the ritual scars of his order, still carrying the weight of a defeat he believed was his fault. He had been the one to stand before the swarm's first wave. He had been the one who failed, and the guilt had followed him into the void like a second shadow. "We cannot stop here," he repeated, "because this place is not empty, Minister, and anything that is not empty is not safe." "The Ulgathi will not follow us in," Taleth said. "They stopped at the border. They turned around. For the first time in 400 years, they were afraid." "They were not afraid of us," Kale said. "They were afraid of this place. And Minister, when the thing that eats civilizations is afraid of something, that something is not our salvation." The science officer, a woman named Vel, who had not slept in 3 days, spoke without looking up from her instruments. Her voice was small. "The readings are wrong, Minister. All of them. This sector has no debris, no radiation, no residue of any kind. It has been cleaned." "Cleaned?" "Scoured," Vel said. "Every trace of matter, swept away, over and over again, as if something has been maintaining this place for a very long time. As if this void is not a graveyard, Minister. As if it is a garden." The armada drifted deeper into the moor because there was nowhere else to go. Behind them, the Ulgathi swarm had not attacked. It had not retreated. It had simply stopped at the border of the dead zone and arranged itself into a patient, watching ring, like wolves at the edge of a firelight they could not cross. And in front of them, at the center of the moor, something pulsed. It was faint at first, a pinprick of cold, wrong-colored light, so distant that Taleth might have dismissed it as a star. But stars did not pulse. Stars did not blink in a slow, patient rhythm, as though counting, as though waiting for them to come closer. "We should go around it," Taleth said. "There is no around," Kale said. "The moor is a sphere. The light is at its center. Every path leads there, or we turn back and give ourselves to the swarm. Then we stop here. We hold position. We wait." "Wait for what?" Kale asked. And for the first time in 11 days, Taleth had no answer. She had been running so long, she had forgotten there was anything after the running. The first scout wing launched 6 hours later. Taleth sent 11 ships ahead, a full mapping wing, to trace the boundary of the light and find a way around it. The ships had been gone for almost a day when the first of them came back. One ship. The others were simply gone. Not destroyed, not disabled. Gone. As though they had never existed. As though the void had simply closed over them and forgotten they had ever been there. The single returning ship drifted back toward the armada on dead engines, its hull intact, its lights dark. "Open a channel," Taleth ordered. "Order them to respond." The ship did not respond. It could not. When the docking clamps finally sealed it to the flagship's hull and the Arasi cut through the airlock, they found the ship empty of its crew. Not dead, not torn apart. Empty. Every station vacant, every seat folded away, as if the crew had simply risen and walked off the ship into the void without a sound. But on the navigation console, something had been written, carved into the metal with a tool that had left clean, deliberate furrows, in a language no one in the armada recognized. Vel translated it, her voice shaking. "This is not a dead zone. This is a sealed wound. Do not wake what sleeps at the center. Do not approach the light." Every ship in the armada went silent at once, because the light the warning spoke of was already visible on every screen. The pinprick at the center of the moor, the patient, pulsing thing that had been waiting for them since before they arrived. It was closer now, much closer, as though it had been moving toward them while they deliberated, drawn by the sound of their fear. "Sound the alarm," Taleth said. All ships, weapons to full, shields up." "We have no shields," Cale said quietly. "We never did. The swarm stripped our defences in the first hour of the fall. We have engines, and we have hope, and neither of those is a weapon." "Then what do we have?" Cale looked at her, and for a moment the broken priest looked almost sorry for her. "We have the thing that made the swarm afraid," he said. "We have the centre of the light, and we have just enough time to decide whether we die running, Minister, or we die walking toward it with our heads up." The Armada made its decision in the dark, with the swarm behind them and the light before them, and nowhere else in all of creation to go. They walked toward it. The swarm ships began to move as soon as the Armada turned toward the light. Not to attack. The Arasi braced for the swarm's assault, for the mindless hunger that had devoured their civilization, but the ships that ringed the Moor's border did not strike. They moved instead like shepherds, like drovers, slowly, patiently, closing the flanks, cutting off any path that did not lead to the center, herding the Armada forward with a gentleness that was somehow more terrifying than violence. "They're not hunting us," Cale breathed, watching the tactical display. "They're driving us, like cattle. Whatever is at the center of this place wants us alive, wants us to come to it." "Then we turn and fight through them," Talith said. "We tried," Cale said. "The flagship tried. 11 scouts. 1 battleship before the fall. We do not fight the swarm, Minister. We only choose how we are consumed. And right now, it is choosing for us." "Then we choose differently," Talith said. "Vel, plot a course. I want a single corvette to run a straight line toward the light. Full speed. Transmit everything it sees." "You're sending them to die," Cale said. "I'm sending them to learn," Talith said. "And what they learn will decide whether the rest of us live or feed the hunger." The corvette, the Quiet Faith, launched 30 minutes later. Its crew of 12 knew they were a sacrifice. They went anyway. The Arasi had been a people of faith once, and even in the ashes of their empire, faith remained a kind of courage. The Quiet Faith transmitted the whole way, and the Armada listened to the voice of its crew grow thinner, stranger, more afraid, as the light at the center of the moor grew brighter on every screen. "Minister," the pilot said, her voice crackling with static, "the light is not a star. I can see it now. It is a structure, a ring, polished black material, 400 kilometers across, hanging in the void, and there is something standing before it." "Something?" "A figure, a single figure in a pressure suit, impossibly small against that scale. It is, Minister, it is raising its hand." "Raising it how?" "In command," the pilot said. And then, with a calm that would haunt Talith for the rest of her life, she added, "I think we've made a terrible mistake." The transmission cut out mid-word, not with an explosion, not with a scream, mid-word, as if the pilot had been simply silenced, her thought unfinished, her voice plucked from existence. The last sound the Armada heard from the Quiet Faith was not static. It was a single, cheerful whistle. Every speaker on every ship in the Armada went dead at once. Then all together they came back, and the voice that filled them was ancient, amused, and dangerous beyond measure. "Welcome to the Moor," the voice said. "I'm sorry about your scouts, and your corvette. They tripped the perimeter, and the perimeter doesn't ask questions. That's on me. I should have disarmed it after the last war. But you've come at a wonderful time, and I would hate to waste you." "Who are you?" Talith demanded, her voice barely steady. "I'm the reason the galaxy calls this place a graveyard," said Jonah Reyes. I'm the reason the Ulgathi turned and ran. I'm the one who has been sitting here for 400 years, keeping the biggest secret in the universe. And you, Minister, have just brought the biggest fleet in the galaxy right to my door." He paused, and the pause was the worst part of all, because in that silence, Talith understood that they had not escaped anything. They had been caught by something older than their fear. "Congratulations, Minister," Jonah Reyes said. "You've delivered the bait. Now let's see what takes it." Jonah Reyes let the armada approach the ring, not as guests, as assets. He did not come to them, he required them to come to him, and the swarm behind them made certain they had no choice but to obey. The Arasi crossed the last 100,000 kilometers in a silence broken only by the sound of their own hearts. And when they arrived at the ring, Jonah Reyes was waiting. He stood on the black surface of the great structure as though it was solid ground, a figure of ordinary height in an ancient pressure suit that had been patched 100 times, each patch a small confession of a very long life. His face, visible through the suit's cracked visor, was old beyond the reach of years. His eyes, though, were not old. They were young and sharp and terribly alive. And they looked at the 4 million refugees of a dead empire with the calm satisfaction of a man inspecting a tool he had just been handed. "The last time anyone came here," he said, "was the Veil, 400 years ago. They came with the largest fleet the galaxy had ever assembled, 1 million warships. They wanted to end humanity. They wanted to erase the only species that had ever refused to kneel." "They failed," Kale said. Jonah Reyes smiled. It was not a kind smile. "They didn't fail," he said. "They succeeded in arriving. That was all I needed them to do." 400 years ago, humanity had not lost the war against the Veil. Humanity had ended it, not by outfighting the greatest fleet ever assembled, but by baiting it, by luring the divine Veil Armada into this sector, into this trap, and then detonating a stellar collapse device that erased them from existence. The sector had become the Maw, a wound in reality that still bled. The Veil were gone, every last mind, every last ship, every last god they had ever worshipped, and humanity had withdrawn from the galaxy, gone quiet, become legend, a myth that other species whispered about, a cautionary tale, a species that had burned a god and then walked away into the dark. But someone had stayed. "Why one?" Kale asked. "Why leave a single soldier to guard a wound for 400 years?" "Because the wound doesn't need an army," Jonah said. "It needs a keeper, someone patient enough to wait, someone ruthless enough to use what comes, someone who understands that the only way to keep a trap deadly is to make it look empty." He gestured at the armada, at the 4 million souls floating in the void before him. "Everyone thinks the story ended," he said. "That's the whole point. You looked at this place and saw a graveyard. I looked at it and saw a mousetrap. And you, Minister, just crawled in looking for cheese." The Arasi did not want to believe him. Talith stood on the bridge of the kindred of the last dawn and watched the old human on the screen, and every instinct she had screamed that this was a lie, a trick, another predator wearing a gentler face. But the evidence was all around them. The cleaned void, the empty scout ships, the swarm that had stopped at the border, afraid to enter, and the one truth that she could not deny. The Ulgathi, the great consumer of minds, had met this single human 400 years ago, and had never once tried to cross the line he guarded. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "Nothing you're not willing to give," Jonah said. "Yet. I want you to understand what you've walked into. I want you to see the stakes. And then I want you to decide whether you are refugees, Minister, or whether you are soldiers." "We are survivors," Kale said. "We are not your tools. We did not come here to be used." "You came here to escape the thing that ate your world," Jonah said. "And you did, for now. But the swarm is still out there, Minister, and it is not going away. It is waiting. It has always been waiting, and I have spent 400 years making certain that when it finally decided to come for the door I guard, it would find something it could not eat." "Then you have been waiting a long time, alone," Talith said. Jonah's eyes flickered. It was the only crack in his composure, and it was gone so fast she almost missed it. "I have not been alone," he said. "The wound remembers, and the wound is patient, the way all wounds are patient. It has been waiting too." Kale refused to be bait. It was not that he disbelieved Jonah, it was that he could not bear it. The old human spoke of the Orasi as components, as assets, as bait for a war that was not theirs, and Kale had already failed his people once. He would not fail them again by delivering them into the hands of another master. He would rather die fighting the swarm than be used like cattle by a man who had waited 4 centuries to pull the trigger. So Kale did what broken men do. He acted. He seized command of a wing of warships in the night, overriding their captains with the authority of his war priest order, and he led them out against the swarm, not to flee, to fight, to prove one last time that the Orasi were not prey. The swarm did not destroy his wing, it dissolved them. Kale watched it happen on his tactical display, helpless, as ship after ship was simply unhooked from existence. Not blown apart, unhooked. The swarm's tendrils reached out, found each vessel, and drew out everything inside it that was aware. Everything that was conscious, everything that was them. The ships did not explode, they went quiet. And then they drifted, empty and smiling, crewmen frozen at their stations, with expressions of distant peace on their faces. "Turn back!" Kale shouted into the comms. "All ships, turn back! Turn back!" The last ship in his wing went quiet mid-turn. Kale was alone. And the swarm, having tasted his people, having drunk his wing down to the dregs, began to turn its patient, terrible attention toward him. Jonah Reyes let it happen. He did not lift a finger. He did not open the ring. He watched the mutiny fail on the screens of his ancient station, and he let Kale's wing be consumed, and he did nothing at all. And that inaction, that terrible patience, was the most frightening thing he had done in the entire story. "Why didn't you help them?" Talith screamed at him when Kale's ship finally limped back to the Armada, half its crew empty, its war priest broken and silent. "Because he had to learn," Jonah said. "You all have to learn. You came here thinking you escaped a war. You didn't. You came here thinking you were refugees. You're not. You're recruits. And recruits who cannot follow orders get their lesson before the real fight, not after. You let them die to teach a lesson. I let them die to teach you." Jonah turned to face her, and for the first time, Talith saw something in his old eyes that was not patience. It was grief. "The swarm is not the danger, Minister. The swarm is what the maw keeps out. You want to see danger? Look at what happens if the swarm ever gets past me, past this ring, and reaches the space behind it." "What's behind it?" Jonah said nothing. He did not have to. Behind the ring, faintly visible now that the Armada was close enough, was a planet. Small, blue, alone. A world that Talith's instruments told her should not exist in this dead region. A world that was alive with a soft green light. A world that was being very deliberately shielded from the void around it. A human world. "The swarm has never once moved on that planet," Jonah said quietly. "In 400 years, They have never tried. They know what I did here. They know what is at stake. They know the wound is a door, and that on the other side of the door is everything they have ever feared. But you brought them something, Cale said. His voice was hollow. You brought them us. No, Jonah said. You brought them yourselves. And now, because of your little mutiny, because you threw your people at them like feed, they have tasted what is inside this armada. They have tasted 4 million fresh minds, fresh souls, and now they think they have enough. Enough for what? To crack the door, Jonah said. They are going to open the wound, and if that wound opens, Minister, everything we buried 400 years ago comes back. And the veil, Minister, are not the worst thing that was put down in this sector. The swarm began to move. Not at the armada. The swarm had already taken its taste and found it good. The swarm began to move, slowly, deliberately, inexorably, toward the small blue planet hanging behind the ring, toward the door, toward the wound. And for the first time in 400 years, Jonah Reyes looked afraid. Jonah stopped protecting the armada. He started arming them. The ring, that great black structure that had hung at the center of the moor for 4 centuries, began to unfold. It did not open like a door. It opened like a hand unclenching, its segments peeling back to reveal what had been hidden inside all along. Not emptiness, not a gate, a weapon. The ring was a lattice of human war satellites. Dormant for 400 years, every one of them still armed, every one of them lighting up now with a cold, hungry fire as Jonah Reyes woke the greatest arsenal ever hidden in the dark. The Arasi watched it happen on their screens, and they understood, with a horror that went to the bone, that the entire sector was not a trap. It was a weapon system, and they had been standing inside the barrel. Jonah handed Taleth a firing schematic and said 4 words that changed everything. You wanted to matter. Here. The swarm's forward tendrils reached the blue planet's orbit. Jonah did not defend the planet directly. He could not. The arsenal at his command was powerful, but it was not enough to stop the swarm's full attention, not with 4 million fresh minds to feed it. So he did what he had always done. He used the tools he had. He herded the swarm into a choke point, using the Arasi fleet as bait, the same way he had used Cale, the same way he had used every life in this sector for 4 centuries. The Arasi felt it, the sickening realization that they were not soldiers in a great war, but fuel for a dying man's patience. And Taleth confronted him in the middle of the battle, her voice raw with rage. I'd sacrifice anything to win this, Jonah said. His voice was cold and true. Anything. I have sacrificed 400 years. I have sacrificed every friend I ever had. I will sacrifice you and your armada and every soul on it, if that is what it takes to keep the door shut. You are just lucky, Minister, that you are useful. The battle was not going well. The swarm was vast, patient, and endlessly hungry. It had been denied this door for 4 centuries, and now it had tasted the minds of a world it had been denied, and it would not be turned aside by anything less than the end of the universe. The satellites fired. The swarm reeled, then recovered. The satellites fired again, and slowly, terribly, the swarm began to push through. And then the swarm did the one thing Jonah Reyes had never planned for. It began to withdraw. Not retreat, withdraw. Deliberately, methodically, pulling its tendrils back from the planet, folding its forces into a tighter, denser mass, as though it had decided that the battle was not worth the cost. 400 years of patience, 400 years of waiting for this moment. And the swarm, the great consumer of minds, looked at the trap Jonah had set and declined to spring it. Jonah stared at the tactical display, and for the first time, Teleth saw what fear looked like on a man who had waited 4 centuries to die. "They're not retreating," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "They're consolidating. They're going to try to crack the door in one blow, all of it, everything they have." "Then we stop them," Teleth said. "We can't," Jonah said. "Not head-on, not with what we have. The swarm is going to commit everything to a single strike, and if it lands, the wound opens, and everything we buried comes back." He looked at her. "There's only one way to make them commit early. Only one way to force them to fight on my ground." He opened the inner gate. The ring's defenses, the ones that had held the swarm at bay for 4 centuries, began to fail one by one. Jonah Reyes, keeper of the wound, opened the door. Not to let the swarm through, to make it commit, to give it a path to the planet so clear, so irresistible, that the swarm could not refuse to take it. To bet everything, every life, every satellite, every 400 years of patience, on the desperate hope that the swarm would take the bait before it understood the trap. And in the quiet before the storm, Cale finally understood him. Not the weapon, the man. He found Jonah in the heart of the ring, alone, surrounded by the fire of a war he had started 400 years ago. The old human stood at a console older than Cale's entire civilization, his hands steady, his face calm. And Cale, broken and humbled and emptied of everything but the need to understand, asked him the question that had been burning in him since the moment they arrived. "Why?" Cale asked. "You could have let us die at the border. You could have let the swarm take us and kept your secret. Why save us? Why arm us? Why make us part of this?" Jonah did not look up from his console. "Because you're the first people in 400 years who came here running from the same thing I've been guarding against," he said. "You think I'm cruel. You think I've been using you. You're right. But do you want to know the secret humans keep? The one the whole galaxy never understood?" Cale waited. "We don't win because we're stronger," Jonah said. "We win because we're willing to lose everything. Every war we've ever won, we won by standing where we couldn't retreat and refusing to move. The Veil outnumbered us 1,000 to 1. Didn't matter. We'd already decided to die. And dying men are the worst enemy a living army can face." He gestured at the swarm, gathering its terrible strength beyond the gate. "That's what they're afraid of. Not our weapons, not our walls, our refusal to give up. They've never met a species that would rather burn the whole galaxy than kneel." He smiled, and this time it was not cruel. It was tired. They're meeting one now. The swarm struck, all of it, every ship, every tendril, every ounce of the great consuming hunger that had devoured 1,000 worlds. It poured through the open gate in a single, blinding, terrible wave, drawn by the clear path to the planet, committed beyond the point of no return. It was the largest concentration of the swarm in its entire history, and it was heading straight into the heart of the wound. And Jonah Reyes turned the entire Maw into the same weapon that had killed the Veil. The stellar collapse device did not detonate at the center of the ring. It detonated at the center of the swarm. The wound that had been kept shut for 400 years opened, and opened into the swarm itself. And the fire that had erased a god's fleet 4 centuries ago rose up, and erased the great consumer of minds. The swarm screamed, not with sound, with minds. 400 years of accumulated awareness, 1 trillion stolen thoughts, every civilization the swarm had ever devoured, all of it poured out in a single psychic shriek that rippled across the sector and would be felt, faintly, by every telepath in the galaxy for a generation. The swarm died, not in a moment, in an eternity. In every mind it had ever eaten, all of them screaming at once as they were released into the fire. And in the middle of it, Jonah Reyes stood at his console and held the gate open. "The corridor," he said to Talith, his voice steady, his hands still working, blood beginning to run from his nose and ears as the psychic backlash of the dying swarm tore through him. "Take your fleet through the corridor. Now, while the fire is eating them. It will not hold forever." "Come with us," Talith said. "You can't stay. The fire will take you with it." "I know," Jonah said. "Then come." "I can't," Jonah said, and he looked at her, and for the first time his old eyes were not patient, and not grieving, and not cruel. They were at peace. "The wound needs a keeper, Minister. It always has. If I leave, it closes, and everything we buried comes back. This is what I have been waiting for. 400 years, a war worth dying in." He had waited 400 years for a war worth dying in. He got one. The Arasi fleet escaped through the narrow corridor, a thread of light in the wall of fire. Jonah Reyes holding it open with the last of the zone's power, with the last of his strength, with the last of his 400 years. Ship after ship slid through, Kale's hands on the helm of the flagship, Taleth's voice shouting orders, the swarm's death scream fading behind them into a silence that would echo forever. The last ship crossed the threshold, and Jonah Reyes stayed at the center of the ring, at the heart of the wound, as the fire took him. The Arasi broke free into open space. Not the moor, open space, real space. The swarm gone, the ring gone, the wound sealed forever, consumed by its own fire, the sector a true graveyard at last, empty of everything that had ever lived in it. The blue planet was safe, shielded by a fire that had cost the man who guarded it everything he had. It cost the Arasi too. Kale's wing, a third of the fleet. 4 million souls reduced to 3, and of those 3, a great many were not whole. The crewmen who had been touched by the swarm, who had been tasted and returned, drifted through their ships like ghosts, remembering things that were not theirs, dreaming of minds they had never owned. The Armada was not triumphant, it was alive, and after what it had seen, alive was almost more than it could bear. Talith looked back at the dead zone, now truly dead, Jonah's fortress consumed by his own fire, the Keeper gone, his 400 years spent in a single act of terrible, necessary violence. "He saved us," Kale said. He stood beside her, the war priest who had tried to die fighting and had been saved by the man he had tried to defy. "He used us, he sacrificed us, and he saved us." "He did what he had to do," Talith said, "to keep the door shut." "Was it worth it?" Kale asked. 4 million souls, his own life, 400 years alone in the dark. Was any of it worth it? Talith did not answer. She did not know. And then, as the Armada fled into the black, one last signal sputtered out of the collapsing moor. Not Jonah's voice, something older. A single line repeated, in a human language 4 centuries dead. The words resolved themselves on the flagship's console, translated by a system that had been listening to that language for longer than the Arasi had existed. "Keep her down, sending new coordinates. The next one is already in place." The war was not over. It never was. Humanity was never one fortress. It was a chain, a line of keepers stretching back 400 years, each one standing alone in the dark, each one waiting, each one ready to spend an eternity of patience on a single act of defiance. Jonah Reyes was gone, but the chain did not break. It could not break. It was built from the one thing the galaxy had never understood, the refusal to give up. The Arasi had escaped the deadliest zone in the galaxy. They had not escaped the humans who guarded it. And somewhere behind them, in the silence where a war had just been won, A new light was already beginning to pulse at the center of a different dark. A new keeper had just heard the call. A new hand reached out to a new console. And far away, on a small, blue, shielded world, a species that had burned a god and walked away was still waiting. Not because they were strong, because they would rather burn the whole galaxy than kneel. And the galaxy finally was beginning to understand. For more HFY stories, subscribe to HFY Legends and tell me in the comments, if the chain called your name, would you take your place and wait?